I never believed in ghosts, not until I moved into 13 Raven Street. The real estate agent said it was a steal, and I should have known better. In this market, a Victorian mansion going for a fraction of its worth, there had to be a catch. But I was desperate for a fresh start after the divorce, and the idea of restoring this grand old dame to her former glory appealed to my wounded pride. First night, I dismissed the whispers as the wind. By the third night, I couldn't deny it anymore. The walls were talking. It started in the master bedroom. Faint murmur, like a radio playing in another room. I'd press my ear against the faded wallpaper, trying to make out words, but they always slipped away, leaving me with a vague sense of unease. I threw myself into renovations, hoping physical labor would drown out the voices. I tore down walls, ripped up floorboards, and stripped away layers of paint. With each piece of the house I dismantled, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. One night, exhausted from a day of demolition, I collapsed into bed without showering. As I drifted off, a voice cut through the usual murmur. "She's here." I bolted upright, heart pounding. The voice had been clear as day, right next to my ear. But I was alone in the room, the moonlight casting long shadows across the bare floor. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me. Then, slowly, the whispers returned. This time I could almost make out words. "Trapped, help us, she won't let go." I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for the light switch. The bulb flickered to life, revealing nothing but peeling wallpaper and dust motes dancing in the air. That's when I noticed it. A small door, no higher than my knee, set into the wall beside the fireplace. How had I missed it before? With trembling hands I approached, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. The door was real enough, its brass knob cool against my palm. It turned with a rusty squeak, revealing a dark crawl space beyond. "Hello?" I called again, peering into the gloom. "Is anyone in there?" A child's laughter echoed from the depths, followed by a woman's stern voice. "Hush now, it's not time yet." I slammed the door shut, my heart racing. This was insane. I needed sleep, that's all. In the morning, I'd call a contractor to seal up that crawl space and be done with it. But sleep eluded me. The whispers grew more frantic as the night wore on, cacophony of pleas and warnings I couldn't quite grasp. By dawn, I was a wreck, huddled in the corner of my room, watching that little door with bloodshot eyes. The next few days passed in a blur. I avoided the master bedroom, sleeping on the couch downstairs, but the voices followed me, seeping through the walls, rising from the floorboards. They were everywhere now, a constant background hum punctuated by moments of terrifying clarity. "She's angry," a child's voice giggled as I made coffee one morning. I whirled around, but the kitchen was empty. "You shouldn't have come," an old man wheezed as I tried to watch TV. The words came from the antique radio I'd found in the attic, even though it wasn't plugged in. I stopped answering my phone, stopped opening the curtains. The outside world felt distant, unreal. This house was my reality now, with its shifting shadows and whispering walls. One night, driven to the brink of madness, I decided to confront whatever haunted this place. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and my dwindling sanity, I climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. A little door stood open. I don't remember crawling through. One moment I was standing in the bedroom, the next I was in a narrow passage that seemed to stretch forever. The walls pulsed with a sickly light, and the whispers surrounded me, deafening in their intensity. I stumbled forward, guided by unseen hands. Ghostly faces flickered in my peripheral vision. A young woman with sad eyes, boy with a cruel smile, an old man whose features shifted like smoke. "Welcome home," they whispered in unison. "She's been waiting for you." The passage opened into a vast, circular room. Hundreds of little doors lined the walls, each one a portal to a different part of the house. In the center stood a tall mirror, its surface rippling like water. And reflected in that mirror was a face I recognized with horror, my own, but not as I am now. This was me as a child, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a silent scream. "There you are, my dear," a woman's voice purred from behind the mirror. "I've missed you so." The surface of the mirror shattered, and a hand reached out, skeletal fingers grasping for me. I turned to run. The passage had vanished. There was nowhere to go but forward, into that beckoning embrace. As those cold fingers closed around my wrist, I understood at last. I hadn't chosen this house by chance. I'd been drawn here, called home by a force I'd spent a lifetime trying to forget. "Welcome back," the woman who was not my mother whispered. "You can never leave again." The walls of 13 Raven Street have a new voice now. Do you listen closely? You might hear me whispering, warning the next poor soul who thinks they found their dream home. But by then, we'll be too late. It always is. I should have known better than to buy a house sight unseen. But when my great-aunt Mildred passed away and left me her old Victorian in the will, I couldn't resist. Free house in a quaint New England town? It seemed like the perfect escape from my dead-end job and suffocating city life. The first red flag came when I pulled up to 66 Willow Lane. The house loomed before me, its weathered clapboards the color of old bones, windows like sunken eyes staring blankly at the overgrown yard. A cord of dread tightened in my chest, but I brushed it off. Old houses always looked a bit creepy, right? The interior was a time capsule, filled with dusty antiques and faded photographs. As I explored, a sense of unease grew. The floorboards creaked under my feet, but the sound seemed to linger too long, echoing like sighs. In the kitchen, I could have sworn I saw a shadow dart across my peripheral vision, but when I turned, there was nothing there but peeling wallpaper. That first night, I tossed and turned on the ancient four-poster bed, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Just as I was drifting off, a loud thump from downstairs jolted me awake. Heart racing, I crept down to investigate, armed with nothing but my phone's flashlight. The noise had come from the kitchen. As I entered, my beam of light fell on an open cabinet door. Odd, I thought. I was sure I'd closed them all earlier. A shuffling sound drew my attention to the pantry. With trembling fingers, I reached for the doorknob. Pantry was empty, save for a few cobweb-covered jars. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Back wall seemed off somehow. I ran my hand along the rough wood, feeling for any irregularities. There, a small notch, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. I pressed it, and a section of the wall swung inward with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Common sense screamed at me to turn back, to call the police, to get out of this house and never return. But curiosity, that damned human flaw, propelled me forward. Step by creaking step, I made my way down. The basement was a cavernous space, far larger than the house above should have allowed. My flashlight beams swept across piles of discarded furniture, moldering books, and what looked disturbingly like human bones. In the center of the room stood a massive stone well, its mouth gaping wide. As I approached, fetid odor wafted up, along with the unmistakable sound of chewing. I leaned over the edge, shining my light into the depths. At first I saw nothing but inky blackness. Then, movement. Something was climbing up the well shaft, its wet flesh slapping against the stone. I scrambled backward, but my foot caught on a loose floorboard. I fell hard, my phone clattering away into the darkness. Blind and terrified, I crawled towards where I thought the stairs were. The sounds of whatever was in the well growing louder. My hand touched something soft and yielding, not the floor. With dawning horror, I realized I was touching flesh, cold, clammy flesh that pulsed beneath my fingers. The floor itself was alive. I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror. The flesh beneath me quivered in response, and suddenly I was sinking, a living floor enveloping me like quicksand. I fought, clawing at the writhing mass, but it was no use. The last thing I saw before the flesh closed over my head was a monstrous shape hauling itself out of the well, its countless eyes gleaming hungrily in the dark. I don't know how long I was trapped in that fleshy prison. Time lost all meaning in the suffocating darkness. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind fracturing under the weight of my reality. Sometimes I could hear voices, the chittering of the well creature, the wet squelching of the floor, and underneath it all, a deep, rhythmic thrumming like a massive heartbeat. The house, I realized with dawning horror, was alive, and it was digesting me. In my more lucid moments, I pieced together the truth. This house, this abomination, had been feeding for generations. My great-aunt Mildred hadn't passed away peacefully in her sleep as I'd been told. She'd been consumed just like I was being consumed now. How many others had met this fate? How many unwary travelers or distant relatives had been lured here, only to disappear into the hungry maw of 66 Willow Lane? Just when I'd given up hope, resigned myself to becoming one with this monstrous dwelling, I felt a shift. Flesh around me convulsed, and suddenly I was being pushed upward. I burst into the open air of the basement, covered in a foul-smelling slime but blessedly alive. The floor rippled beneath me, and a sound like 1,000 whispers filled the air. Not ready. Not ripe. Come back when you're ready. I didn't question my luck. I ran, stumbling up the stairs and out of that nightmare house. I didn't stop running until I reached the town, babbling my story to disbelieving police officers. They searched the house, of course, found nothing but a normal, if dilapidated, old Victorian. No secret basement, no well, no living floor. I was dismissed as a drug addict or lunatic. The house still stands on Willow Lane, waiting for its next victim. But I know the truth. Sometimes late at night, I can still feel phantom tendrils of flesh creeping across my skin. I wake up gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat. It smells faintly of decay. The house is patient. It can wait. One day, when I'm old and my mind begins to slip, I'll forget the horror. I'll remember only that I have a house waiting for me. Family legacy on a quiet street in New England. And I'll go back to 66 Willow Lane. Back to the hungry house that's been waiting all these years to finish its meal. If you ever find yourself driving through a small town and see a Victorian house with weathered clapboards, the color of old bones, keep driving. No matter how good the deal seems, no matter how desperately you need a fresh start. Some houses are better left abandoned. Some legacies are better left unclaimed. And 66 Willow Lane? It's always hungry for new residents. I've always been fascinated by sound. As an acoustic engineer, I've spent my career studying the way sound waves travel, bounce, and distort. But nothing in my years of research could have prepared me for what I encountered at 27 Resonance Road. It started as a routine job. The owner, a reclusive composer named Evelyn Marsh, had complained about strange echoes in her century-old mansion. She'd tried soundproofing, but the problem persisted. Intrigued by the challenge, I agreed to take a look. From the moment I stepped through the ornate front door, I knew this was no ordinary house. The foyer seemed to swallow sound, my footsteps eerily muted on the marble floor. Yet at the same time, I could hear whispers, faint, indistinct, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "Miss Marsh?" I called out. My voice didn't echo as it should have in such a large space. Instead, it seemed to hang in the air, the syllables stretching and distorting until they were unrecognizable. A door creaked open to my left, and a pale, gaunt woman emerged. Evelyn Marsh looked nothing like I'd imagined. Her eyes were sunken, darting nervously around the room, as if watching for something. "You're the sound expert?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank God. I thought I was going mad. She led me through the house, pointing out areas where the acoustic anomalies were strongest. In the music room, a grand piano stood silent, a thin layer of dust on its keys. "I haven't been able to compose in months," Evelyn admitted. "Every note I play comes back wrong." I set up my equipment, sensitive microphones, spectrum analyzers, ultrasonic detectors. As I worked, Evelyn hovered nearby, wringing her hand. "Can you hear them?" she asked suddenly. "Hear what?" I replied, adjusting a dial. "The echoes, the voices. They're always whispering, just on the edge of hearing. Sometimes I think I recognize them." I assured her we'd get to the bottom of it, but privately, I was concerned. This level of auditory hallucination suggested serious psychological issues. Still, I had a job to do. As night fell, I began my analysis. The readings were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Sound waves behaved erratically, bending in impossible ways. Frequencies shifted without cause. And underneath it all, constant low hum just below the threshold of human hearing. I was puzzling over a particularly strange spectrogram when a blood-curdling scream shattered the silence. I raced upstairs to find Evelyn cowering in a corner of her bedroom, hands clasped over her ears. "Make it stop," she shrieked. "They won't stop talking." But I heard nothing except the pounding of my own heart. I tried to calm her, but she was inconsolable. Eventually, she fell into an exhausted sleep, and I retreated to continue my work. Around 3 a.m., as I was reviewing my data, I heard it. Faint, melodic humming coming from the music room. Evelyn must have woken up, I thought. But when I went to check, room was empty. The piano, however, was open, its strings vibrating softly without being touched. As I stood there, trying to rationalize what I was seeing, the humming grew louder. It was joined by other sounds, a child's laughter, muffled sobs, angry shouts. They swirled around me, growing in intensity until I could barely think. And then, cutting through the cacophony, a single clear voice. "Help us." I ran. Out of the music room, down the stairs, heading for the front door. But the sounds followed, growing louder with each step. By the time I reached the foyer, it was deafening. A wall of noise that pressed against me with almost physical force. The door wouldn't open. I pulled and pushed, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Behind me, the voices reached a fever pitch. I turned, pressing my back against the door, and that's when I saw them. Ghostly figures, dozens of them, drifting down the stairs and through the walls. Men, women, children, all with the same hollow eyes and reaching hands. As they approached, their voices became clearer. "Stay with us. Don't leave us alone. We've been so lonely." I closed my eyes, willing it to be a nightmare. When I opened them, the ghosts were gone. But the voices remained, now coming from the very walls of the house. With dawning horror, I understood. This house wasn't just haunted. It was a tuning fork for the dead, amplifying the voices of those who had died within its walls. And now that it had a new listener, it didn't want to let me go. I don't know how long I huddled there, hands over my ears, trying to block out the ghostly chorus. Hours, maybe. As the first light of dawn crept through the windows, the voices finally began to fade. The door swung open at my touch, and I stumbled out into the cool morning air. Behind me, I heard Evelyn's voice, thin and reedy. "Where are you going? Don't leave me here alone." I turned back just for a moment. Evelyn stood in the doorway, but she looked different, transparent. Her eyes were hollow, her form blurring at the edges. And behind her, filling the foyer, were the ghosts I'd seen in the night. "Please," Evelyn whispered, her voice echoing strangely. "We need you to hear us." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, the house on Resonance Road was far behind me. But I could still hear them, a faint whisper at the edge of my hearing. I tried to go back to my normal life, but the experience haunted me. Couldn't focus on my work. Every sound made me jump, certain I was hearing ghostly voices. I started avoiding people, afraid that if I listened too closely, I'd hear the dead speaking through them. Weeks passed. My work suffered. I was on the verge of losing everything when I received a letter. The return address was 27 Resonance Road. Inside was a single sheet of paper with musical notation. A composition, I realized, Evelyn's final work. As I hummed the melody to myself, I felt a chill run down my spine. The music was beautiful, haunting, and somehow familiar. It was the sound of the house, the voices of the dead transformed into melody. I knew then that I had a choice. I could try to forget, to run from what I'd experienced, or I could embrace it, use my knowledge of acoustics to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. I sit now in my studio, surrounded by equipment both scientific and arcane. The house on Resonance Road is long gone, demolished after Evelyn's disappearance. But its echoes live on. I've become a different kind of acoustic engineer. I help restless spirits find their voice, and I teach the living to listen. Not an easy path. The sounds of the dead are not meant for mortal ears, and each session leaves me drained, teetering on the edge of madness. But I can't stop. The dead have so much to say, and the living need to hear it. So I'll keep listening, keep translating, until the day my own voice joins the ghostly chorus. If you ever find yourself in a quiet room and hear a whisper just on the edge of hearing, pay attention. It might be the wind or your imagination, or it might be me, reaching out from beyond, trying to make you understand. Because in the end, that's all any of us want. To be heard, to be understood, to know that our voices echo on, even after we're gone. Listen closely. The dead are speaking. Can you hear them?